Wife Directive 9A, Headship and Head Covering. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. 1 Corinthians 11:3 says this, "There is one thing I want you to know. The head of every man is Christ. The head of woman is man. And the head of Christ is God." This is God's creation headship order for here on earth since the beginning of time. It is not just for married persons, but for all males and females. Therefore, since this is of God, our flesh, our culture, and Satan will rebel against it. But all the implications of this are staggering. I don't have time in this short writing to discuss all the implications of rebelling against God's creation headship order. You may not realize it, but this affects everything from government to church to marriage to transsexualism and literally everything that God's law is against. But we are going to focus on only one area of it for which the Apostle Paul uses it here to address: men and women praying and prophesying in church. Either the church is going to affect the world or the world is going to affect the church. Since the time of Christ until the middle of the 20th century, the church has influenced the world in this most important area, headship with men and women. In the 20th century, everything began to slowly change. It first began to change in the church, from men only leading to men and women jointly leading, to some churches with only women leading, to dysfunctional families, to government leadership, to increase in crime, and much more. For a woman to rebel in being under man's headship is not only to defy the man, but also his head, Christ, and Christ's head, God, resulting in far more implications. In following verses we will look at later, we will see God's only visible example of his headship here on earth. Every person rebelling against God's headship affects the deterioration of that person, their family, and even erodes civilization itself. To openly honor God's headship will always work to help make you, families, and civilization itself healthy. No man or woman is going to defy God's headship order and not lose out in more ways than one. If you do not want to honor God's most foundational headship order, you will never see all the ways it will bless marriages, children, church fellowship, and even angels, as we will see. Every female is to have some man as her head. God even designed that every female would start with the father being her head. When she got older and marries, her head would be her husband. Traditional marriage is so symbolic of this. The father walks his daughter down the aisle to give her away. The preacher says, "Who gives this woman to this man?" The father says, "Her mother and I do." He then turns his daughter over to her new head, her husband. Usually, a girl will have as her head first her father and then her husband. And if she is older and becomes a widow, she is to be under another man's headship. According to 1 Timothy 5, it should be a family member's household or relative, or if there is no one else, she is to be under the male leadership of the church. If she is younger and becomes a widow, the Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy 5:14, quote, "Therefore I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach." Esther did not have a father, so she was under her godly uncle Mordecai. We also see how important male headship was to Jesus. It was his last act before giving up his spirit on the cross. It's evident sometime after Jesus had started his ministry that Joseph, the husband of Mary, had died, and Mary was living with her children. But Mary and the rest of Jesus' physical family were dramatically rejecting Jesus. Mark 3:21 says, "And when Jesus' family heard what he was doing, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, 'He is out of his mind.'" Again, at a later time in Mark 3:31 through 35, then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. The crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." Jesus asks, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Then Jesus looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother, sister, and mother." End quote. Jesus did not get up and go out to see his mother and brothers, but rather deferred to his eternal Father and spiritual family. Jesus made clear that his spiritual family has precedence over physical family if they are not doing God's will. They had come to Jesus for the second time, trying to pull him away from his disciples. However, toward the end of Jesus' ministry, Mary had a change of heart, and instead of trying to pull Jesus away, she joined Jesus and his disciples on his last trip to Jerusalem. Mary was at the foot of the cross as Jesus was dying. This was Jesus' final deed. In John 19:26 through 27, quote, "When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, 'Dear woman, here is your son.' And he said to his disciple, 'Here is your mother.' And from then on, this disciple took her into his home." End quote. The rest of Jesus' family was still rejecting him. This is another example where Jesus gave the eternal family precedence over his physical family. Therefore, before Jesus gave up his spirit, he made clear that even his mother should be under a man, John, the disciple he loved. And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. There is no time that a woman should not have a man head, and whose head is Christ. Spiritually, we are all under Christ, but in the earthly order, a woman must be under a man. Satan deceived Eve when she momentarily was not under Adam and thus listening to Satan. She was perfect and without sin. If any woman thinks she can be less vulnerable to Satan than Eve, she's already deceived. For a woman to not be vulnerable to Satan, she must always be under her God-given head, her father or husband, or a man whose head is Christ. There is so much more, but we'll have to pick up the rest of this next time. As you will see next time, the headship truth is the first truth for everything else that goes on in the church. Quote, "There is one thing I want you to know. The head of every man is Christ. The head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God."